Imagine this. It's 1775, and tensions in the American colonies are very high. British troops occupy Boston, and colonial forces are preparing for a standoff that will change the future of the American Revolution. But what led to this moment? And why was the Battle of Bunker Hill so important? The story begins with the years of tension between Britain and its American colonies. High taxes, like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act, were imposed without giving the colonies any say in the British Parliament. For the colonists, this felt like nothing short of oppression. One night in 1773, American colonists protested in an unforgettable way. The Boston Tea Party, dumping British tea into Boston Harbor. In response, Britain sent even more troops to maintain control, and conflict soon turned to violence. In April of 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord erupted, marking the first true clashes of the American Revolutionary War. These battles caused unity in the 13 colonies as militias from across New England surrounded Boston, beginning what would be known as the Siege of Boston. As the British occupied Boston, Colonial Forces, now known as the Continental Army, set up a blockade. Led by General George Washington, their goal was simple: trap the British forces and reclaim Boston. But with limited supplies and harsh conditions, maintaining the siege was no easy feat. Despite facing hardships, the Continental Army persisted, and the siege quickly became a battle of strategy. Both sides knew that whoever controlled the high ground around Boston would have the upper hand. And so, the stage was set for the battle that would soon follow at Bunker Hill. In June of 1775, colonial forces received news that the British were planning to seize the hills around Boston, but they will not let this to happen. On the night of June 16, 1775, 1,200 colonial soldiers, under the command of Colonel William Prescott, received their orders from General Artemas Ward. They were to fortify Bunker Hill. But something didn't go as planned. Instead of Bunker Hill, Prescott and his men fortified nearby Breed's Hill, a slightly lower, but more prominent hill. Why? Some historians believe it was due to confusion, others think it was deliberate. However, it's on Breed's Hill that most of the battle would take place. The colonists worked through the night, constructing a makeshift fort known as a redoubt on Breed's Hill. By dawn, the British generals in Boston were surprised to see the Colonial Forces fortification on Breed's Hill. General Gage, who was in command of the British troops in Boston, knew he couldn't allow the colonists to control the heights. If the Americans held Breed's Hill, they could fire down on British ships in the harbor and the city itself. He had to act. The British plan was simple: send a direct assault to push the colonists off the hill. They believed the American forces were poorly trained and would quickly break under the pressure of a full British attack. However, they underestimated the determination of the colonial fighters. By mid-morning on June 17th, Gage had ordered over 2,000 British soldiers, led by Major General William Howe, to march across the Charles River and attack Breed's Hill. The British, dressed in bright red uniforms, marched in perfect lines. But what they were about to face wasn't what they expected. At around 3 p.m., the British began their first assault up the steep slopes of Breed's Hill. Colonial forces, led by Colonel Prescott, held their ground, waiting. The colonial forces were low on ammunition, so Prescott gave the order, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." This wasn't just for dramatic effect, it was a tactical decision. They needed every shot to count. When the British soldiers got within range, the colonists opened fire. British soldiers fell in large numbers. The first attack was a disaster for the British. Shocked by the heavy resistance, the first wave of British attackers retreated. But they were not done yet. A second British assault soon followed. The second wave of British troops faced the same fate as the first. Again, the colonists held firm, inflicting heavy casualties on the British soldiers. But the British were not about to give up. After 2 failed assaults, General Howe regrouped his men, received reinforcements of about 400 soldiers, and ordered a third attack, this time focusing on the weaker flanks of the colonial defenses. And by this point, the colonists had a problem. They were running out of ammunition. When the British launched their third assault, the colonial soldiers could no longer hold them back with musket fire. The fighting quickly turned into hand-to-hand combat. Outnumbered and out of supplies, the colonial forces were eventually forced to retreat from the redoubt on Breed's Hill. As the colonists retreated, some of them were chased and shot by the British soldiers. This includes General Warren. He was hit by a bullet on the face during the final assault by the British soldiers. His death was a great loss to the Patriots. After 2 hours of combat, the British had finally taken the hill, but they suffered a total of over 1,000 casualties. The colonists, despite their retreat, had proven they could stand up to the might of the British Army. Following the Battle of Bunker Hill, the town of Charleston was totally destroyed, and its residents were forced to move and start a new life. George Washington, who is now in command of the Continental Army, would ultimately force British troops out of Boston. Watch out for the next episode on the American history to see how the 13 colonies continued fighting for independence from the British Empire. If you liked this video, subscribe to see more videos on the American Revolution and more.